This audio is brought to you by Business Radio, powered by Wharton.
Hey folks, welcome back. You're in the workplace. I'm Peter Capelli.
I'm Dan O'Mara.
Our fabulous engineer, Danielle, is always thinking about what songs to pull up. And the theme of this half hour, we're going to talk about the aging of the population. Good news, Dan. We're living longer.
Nice.
And that could very well include you and me if we behave ourselves.
Well, isn't that's not really true the last couple of years, isn't it? Life expectancy is going down, driven by white males dying younger?
Yeah, only if you're a poor white male. Otherwise, it's been going up for a long time.
Okay.
Right. So except for those folks, and African Americans going up as well.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody but, I think, poor white men, particularly rural, particularly uneducated.
Yes.
I think maybe women too. But other than that, life expectancy has been going up, and this is a great thing, except sometimes not everybody thinks it's a great thing because they look at aging in the U.S. and the economy and they say, oh, bad news. So we want to talk about that. And with us to talk about it is James Appleby, who's the CEO of the Gerontological Society of America, and the new report that came out this week, which I chaired. We're going to talk about what that report is about and how to think about it going forward. James, welcome.
Thank you, Peter. I'm glad to be here.
So, James, let's start with some basic stuff for people who are not paying attention to what's going on in society. The U.S. population is aging, right? But what does that mean when people say, oh, we're aging? What's that mean? Everybody's obviously getting older, right? What's going on?
Indeed, we're all getting older, and that's a blessing. But what the U.S. public really doesn't notice, Peter, is that we are going through a true transformation in terms of the age structure of our population, and it's a permanent change in which the number of individuals who are older in the population are quickly going to outnumber those that are younger. For example, if you think about the population that's 65 plus, by 2035 there will be more individuals 65 plus in the United States than those under 18.
Oh, cool.
So this transformation is very real, and it's going to be a permanent change in the structure. It's not just a result of the baby boom population. It's going to be a permanent change. So things are going to be a little bit different in American society in the decades ahead.
And this is because, so there's a bunch of ways that population could age, right? One is you could just stop having kids, and so the average changes, and you could do it with immigration, with people coming in being different ages, or people could be living longer, and that's the big one, right? People are living longer, right?
That is, and it's a good news situation, and people are living longer for a lot of reasons that aren't actually noticed by most Americans. We always think of the biomedical innovations, and that's certainly a case. Immunizations, in particular, I'm a big fan of ways to prevent disease, but other reasons as well that we don't notice, like wonderful research done that helps us ensure we have clean water and clean air, and that farmers can produce enough food for the population and good sanitation. These factors really contribute in a big way to increasing longevity, overall population health, and then the biomedical innovations of recent decades as well has been extremely important contributors.
You know, another one that really surprised me a lot was the importance of childhood nutrition. Now, you wonder, what does childhood nutrition have to do with aging? Well, it turns out that lots of diseases that are associated with age, chronic diseases like diabetes and various kinds of heart disease, show up much later in life because of improvements in health of when you're young. Right.
Interesting.
So if you went back to the Civil War, for example, there were this is the first sort of serious epidemiological studies in the U.S. done the Civil War. They found that Civil War veterans were getting chronic illnesses of age in their 40s. Right. So they had COPD and they had all these other hypertension, all these diseases that were going to kill them in their 40s. And over time, those diseases arrived, but later and later and later and later, right? So it used to be, even when we were kids, people in their 60s were pretty old, right? Yeah. We're living about 7 or 8 years longer than our parents. And the other part of that, James is getting at, is that we are also living healthier, right? So that it's not just that we're living longer and we're in nursing homes for longer. James, I thought one of the most startling statistics for me, and surprised me and lots of other people, if you look at the stereotype of old people at the very end of their lives, as everybody's in a nursing home, but it looks like it's only a fraction, right? As I recall from your report, it's about a third or something like that of people end up in any kind of institutionalized care like that, and the typical stay is only a year. So the idea that they're hanging around for a long time in nursing homes is simply not true, right? Did I get that right?
That's right, Peter, and it is a misconception. And in general, I would say that aging in America gets a really bad rap. I mean, the general perspective on aging when you do research with the American public is it's purely about decline, disability, and ultimately, of course, death. And in fact, that is the perception that Americans have, but it's not at all aligned with the reality of population aging. And your case example of nursing homes is a great example. Yeah, only about 1/3 of older adults ever end up in any sort of institutional facility, but at any one time, it's a much smaller percentage. Just a couple percent of the American public is actually in an institutional setting. Yeah. So it's not the future. The aging is changing dramatically, but the public perception of aging has not kept up with scientific reality.
Let's just talk about the baby boom for just a minute and make sure we all understand the demographics of that. The baby boom, do you happen to know, James? I don't. The average age of baby boomers now, baby boomers were people born from, 1946 through 1965 or so? Is that about right?
Through 64.
64? Yep, okay. 64. And what is the average age of baby boomers right now? Do you happen to know? I suppose we could work it out here quickly.
Well, I don't know what the average age is at this point, but I can tell you that right now, on a daily basis, about 10,000 people hit 65 and are going to continue that way for another 10 or 12 years to come, and that's contributing to that permanent shift in the age structure of the American population.
So one of the things that's going on right now, but as you say, it's not the only thing, and it's not the permanent thing, is this bulge in the population, the baby boom, is growing older, and as this big population moves into older age, the average age of the U.S., by definition, starts to go up. But it will continue to go up. It's not dependent on the baby boom, right? It'll continue to go up because we're living longer. However, there is a short-term crunch on health care, right? Because there's so many people moving into a period where at least some of them will end up in institutions of various kind, or for sure, very many more home health care. And so this is causing a big bulge. But it's not an indication that people are in those circumstances longer. It is simply that so many of those folks in the baby boom are hitting that point at exactly the same time. Right. This is all making me feel better. How are you feeling about this, Dan? Better?
Fabulous.
There you go. Much better. All right. So, James, let's get to the heart of this issue here. And that is, so far, unmitigated good thing, right? And that is, we're all going to live longer. No one thinks this is a bad idea. At the very least, people who are approaching traditional mortality years and are going to be living longer, and nobody thinks that's a bad idea. But there are people that are worried about the effects of this on society and the effects on the economy. What are their concerns? And let's see if we can deal with them.
Well, there are a number of concerns that come out, and they're addressed in the report. One of which has to do with, if people are living longer and staying in jobs longer, is that going to decrease the ability of younger individuals to progress in their careers? Are these older adults working longer going to slow that down? They're concerned, will there be enough younger workers to support those older workers in terms of paying for benefits, etc.
Well, let's take those. Yeah, let's take them one at a time. So the first one is the idea that older folks are clogging the pipeline, I suppose, right? And here's an interesting anecdote. The beginning of mandatory retirement. Ask Dan this trivia question. Do you happen to know who started mandatory retirement and why?
Otto von Bismarck. He started Social Security.
He started Social Security. Good guess, but no. Mandatory retirement. Bismarck started the first Social Security program.
German chancellor from the 1920s.
Yep. Earlier. Who set the retirement age at 65 when everybody was dying in their 50s, so it was a pretty cheap program to run. But the reason there was people were moving in from the farms to the cities. And, if you were older on a farm and your kids took over the farm, they kind of took care of you, right? There were always some things you could do around the farm. If you're working in a factory and you can't do that anymore, boom, out. So he was taking care of that.
Who started mandatory retirement?
Thanks for asking, Dan. It was the Sears Roebuck Company, and the reason they started it was because they felt that they could not get their senior people to mentor and develop junior people as long as the senior people felt the junior people were going to bump them out of their job. So it was pretty clever, right? And so the idea was that if you got to go anyway, mandatory retirement, then, you might as well develop these people behind you, right? But I think the idea that people need to keep working, right? If you're going to be living a lot longer, you probably do have to pay for this somehow. And we do have to work longer, but that doesn't necessarily mean you have to stay in the same job, right? So you could do something different. James, do you know anything about the extent to which that is happening now? I know in the corporate world, I don't run into anybody who seems to retire at 65 anymore. People are leaving those jobs in their 50s, right? So I don't think they're clogging any pipeline there. Do you have a sense of the transition out of these career-like jobs into other things, retiring from companies and when they're doing it, that sort of stuff?
Well, certainly, Peter, there are companies, plenty of companies that still have mandatory retirement for their, especially for a number of their senior executives.
Yep.
So that is very much in place, but there are more trends now towards what are referred to as phased retirement, where individuals start to back off what they're doing. There are companies now using that, bringing back retired workers to help do some of that mentoring when a lot of institutional knowledge is being lost with, or with particular clients. So there are steps being taken to try and do some innovation around that, and I hope that employers will continue to do more of that to make those when you're in your 50s, 60s, into 70s, a time where there's more flexibility for workers to come in and out of the workforce as needed to help them, but also to help the companies that they're working for.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a minute. Before we do that, let me remind listeners what we're doing. We're talking about the aging of the American society, American population, and of course in the workforce too, with James Appleby, who's the CEO of the Gerontological Society of America, and the new report, Longevity Economics, Leveraging the Advantages of the Aging Society. So this is, I think, this is the hard topic to talk about, and that is age discrimination, right? Because it seems to be very pervasive, but some measures suggest it is more severe than sex-based or race-based discrimination. And here's just a practical way to see this. If you think about comedians telling jokes, right? They almost, across the board, you still get a lot of jokes about older people, right? Yeah. And in a way that you would not get jokes about women unless it's women comedians telling them, or about race unless it's people from that race telling that joke. But everybody's can still tell age jokes, right?
Yeah, but different way to look at that same phenomenon is this. Since age and aging is a relative factor, we all aspire to be older.
Yes, we do.
And whereas race and gender, at least 20 years ago, whatever race and gender you're born at, you stay there, right? People are more comfortable making age-related cracks, which would reflect discriminatory attitudes, than they are race or gender. It doesn't mean there's more discrimination. It just means people are more open about it.
Really? James, I'm hoping you'll disagree with Dan, because that's the fun part of the program here. But I do, because here's what I think. I don't think people are saying, well, making fun of old people, but that's okay because I know soon I'll be there. Mm-hmm. I don't think they're thinking that way. I think they're making fun of them partly because they don't see themselves as the same, you know.
You're just saying that because you're 60-something.
It's not.
You wouldn't know.
It's not just good-natured kind of, you know. Oh, isn't Grandpa cute here, you know? And I look forward to being like Grandpa. I don't think that's what they're doing. James, what do you think? What's going on with age discrimination? Do you think? What's behind this?
Well, Peter, I do have to disagree with Dan a little bit here.
Good for you. Good.
Age discrimination and ageism in general is so pervasive. We literally don't see it. And even the three of us on this call, I suspect, in the past 24 hours, have said something that you could clearly refer to as ageist.
Yeah.
But it's so ingrained culturally in American society that we don't notice it. And one of the things that we try to be careful about in the aging community when talking about ageism is not to compare it to other forms of discrimination, not to racism or sexism, for the very particular reason that once you start to do that, then the listener starts to rank them in order of importance in their mind, which is which, and
what we were just
ageism
doing.
then goes to the bottom, right? I'm least worried about ageism. Yeah. I'm more worried about racism or sexism or ageism. So we try to just point out what ageism is about in terms of discriminating against someone based typically solely upon their age and misconceptions you have about their ability to be productive, their cognitive capacity, their ability to use technology, everything that goes into it. So ageism is very real, and we're hoping here at the Gerontological Society of America that some work we're doing with other colleague organizations can really begin to get people to dig into their attitudes around aging and to begin to change their perception about older adults. Because after all, we're all just younger versions of our older selves.
Yeah.
We will be an older adult one day.
If we're lucky, right? That's the good news, and that's why everybody's got a stake in reducing age discrimination, because you're going to be in that boat at some point here. So in terms of the big things that people worry about with respect to aging, it really has to do with money mainly, right? And that is, how are we going to pay for this? Am I missing anything, or is that the whole enchilada here?
Well, certainly money's part of it, and financial concerns. And I should say that this report that looks at the advantages of an aging population was supported by Bank of America Merrill Lynch, and they have a deep commitment to understanding how people think about finances and as they age. But really, perhaps even bigger than that is the worry about health. Work that the Bank of America Merrill Lynch has done shows that health is really the issue that concerns people, and in particular, concerns about their cognitive decline and Alzheimer's disease. Okay. That is really the thing that concerns people, more so than cancer or heart disease, et cetera. That concern about cognitive decline is the big thing.
So for people who are approaching those ages, they're thinking about themselves anyway, more than, gosh, I'm going to run out of money. They're thinking, I'm going to get dementia. That seems to be the number one concern, huh?
It's a very big worry for them. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that's a perfectly appropriate thing. I think let's go back to public policy for a second and think about some of the other things. So you mentioned the lump of labor story. I think we talked about that. That's this idea that if older people come back into the workforce, there won't be enough jobs for younger people. And, we know that's not true, right? The population can grow, the labor force can grow, and that doesn't mean that people necessarily lose jobs. There is one quirky little part of this that, Dan, remember, we had our colleague Paul Harrington on here the other day, labor economist at Drexel, who studies local labor markets looking at Philadelphia and inner cities. And one of the things that he noticed was that older individuals are coming back into retail jobs, unskilled jobs, checkers, baggers, fast food, that sort of stuff, which does seem to be about the only opportunity for, high school kids to work. So they are kind of in competition there. But more broadly in the population, probably not an issue, right? They're not really, it's not taking jobs away in that sense.
Well, even if it's not taking jobs away, if you have older people in higher paid positions of power and they're staying in them longer, does it slow the opportunities for advancement and promotion of younger people?
Well, in that company, of course it would, right? So the question is, what happens more broadly? Do those folks end up going someplace else, right? But I think the story about working longer doesn't have to mean that people stay in the same job longer, right? Okay. And I think actually the evidence is pretty clear that people don't really want to do that. They don't want to keep doing the same job they were doing longer. They want to do some different things. And this is the problem. I think we experienced a little bit of this during the Great Recession when people's portfolios declined, their 401ks, their retirement income, and they didn't want to retire because of that. But beyond that, I think there doesn't seem to be a trade-off. So, James, what else would you like people to think about? So we've dealt with a couple of myths here. The big concern people are worried about is health, and that's obviously a big one, their own mental decline in particular. The public policy concern is how are we going to pay for this? And we know the answer to that. The only smart way to do this, but the sensible one, is people keep working longer in different ways, often in different jobs. What else would you like people to take away from this report and more generally about the topic of aging?
Well, I think it's important to reinforce what you were just covering, Peter, that numerous studies have proven that higher rates of employment among older adults positively correlate with higher employment for younger workers. So it's clear that it's a good thing that older individuals are working later into the life course. Yep. I think that the other thing for employers and for employees alike to be very mindful of on the issue of age discrimination has to do with the hiring process. There have been numerous studies that demonstrate that resumes, that individuals looking through resumes, if they can pick up cues that suggest someone is past a certain age, they are much less likely to invite that person in for an interview. And I think that's particularly important nowadays when, due to the large number of applicants, artificial intelligence applications are being used to screen resumes, et cetera, and it sort of raises the question, are we systematically excluding highly capable individuals that could make a real contribution to companies simply because of their age? I think that's a big issue for the American workforce.
Yeah, if you're an employer and you really are concerned about trying to get skilled people who are ready to work and already trained and have good performance and good social skills, all that kind of stuff, and we're ignoring these guys, this is a big mistake. And Dan, here's something I learned from you, but employers, if you're thinking about redesigning your hiring, let's talk about employment limiting age-limited or
experience-limiting advertising.
God, I got that one wrong. Experience-limiting advertisements or jobs. What do they say? What are those things?
The ads that raise concerns with me are ads that say we want someone with experience in this field, but only at least 2, but only 5 years of experience.
Yeah, we're looking to 5 to 10 years
which are actually
experience.
Pretty common.
Yeah.
There's a wave of cases in the early 90s, actually, just aged myself, that in which those
not
were
that there's anything
to be
wrong with that,
age discrimination. I think the better practice is to say at least 2 years. Just leave it at that.
Right, because if you say 5 to 10 years, you're basically ruling out people who are older.
You're saying too much experience, 11 years. So
you can't do this, because it's crazy, right?
And there are some ways to defend that, but it's probably a situation an employer does not want to be in defending that.
Yeah, I think that's right. James, one last thought here. If people want to get a copy of the report, where do they go?
They can go to GSA's website, which is www.geron, that's GERON.org.
For more guest interviews, check out our Wharton Business Radio Highlights podcast on iTunes and Google Play.